Everything Tiffany had read so far made her uneasy, but with each turn of the page she became more and more engaged. It all started with the title. It confused her a bit at first that such a book would even catch her eye. She considered herself to be quite normal and well-adjusted, so why, she wondered, would a book with such a strange title pique her interest? Maybe she should have also asked herself where everyone was that day. The checkout desk was conspicuously vacant, and not a single student was present. She could not recall another time the library had been so quiet. Low and courteous tones were strictly mandated and upheld by the school librarian. Still, on any other day there would, at the very least, have been the occasional boom of a dropped book, a quickly hushed bout of laughter, or the discordant chatter of some student lacking the presence of mind to maintain a whisper. The absence of those or other common bits of noise should have set her on edge and offered some warning. Instead, the silence and lack of eyes upon her inspired the inner explorer that resides in all the children. She wandered the many aisles of books, pretending that each and every one of them belonged to her. She imagined she could read whatever she wanted without judgment, and even borrow a book without properly checking it out. The last thought surprised her quite a bit, but she quickly brushed it off as just another part of the fantasy. She had no intention of actually taking any books, at least not until she came upon the Mischief incarnate. The heavy textbook-sized tome was lying there in the middle of the aisle as if waiting for her. She picked it up and immediately noticed it did not have any of the telltale markings of a library book. There were no stickers on the spine and cover, or even a pocket in the back. While that did puzzle her, it was the lack of a copyright page or any mention of the author that really grabbed her attention. She did not raise her eyes from its pages until the warning bell yanked her back to reality. She grabbed her bag and rushed to class. It was not until after school that she found the book in her bag. She shoved the bag down by her feet and spent the rest of the bus ride home staring out the window, trying not to think about what she'd done. Tiffany tossed the bag on her bedroom floor and forgot all about it until she went to bed. She held out until 3 a.m., lying there in the dark, trying not to think about the book stashed between 2 incomplete homework assignments. At first she thought the guilt of stealing and not doing her homework was what kept her awake, but as the hours crept by, it slowly dawned on her that it was the great cat killer, curiosity. The urge to read just a few more pages nagged at her. When her resolve finally did crack, it cracked wide open. She slipped out of bed and rushed to her bag, nearly pulling the zipper off in her frenzy to claim the prize within. Once she had the book in her hands, she grabbed a flashlight and slipped back under the covers. She read until a few hours later, when she heard her mother doing her routine zombie walk to the coffee maker. Once her mother was out of sight, she slipped into the hall and tiptoed into the bathroom. Once inside, she twisted the cap off the little bottle of red food coloring she brought along to sell her ruse. She had no doubt it would fool her father, but she was not so sure about her mother. It just seemed much more efficient than a hot water bottle, and less gross than a finger down the throat. She did not much like the idea of playing hooky from school, but all she wanted to do was read more of the book. Such a naughty scheme had never occurred to her before, and yet she felt exhilarated by how imaginative and clever it made her feel. She laid the book in her lap and flipped through its pages in search of a passage that would ease her trepidation. The page she wanted came to hand quite easily, as if conjured up by magic. That taboo surrounding deception is man-made, and the greatest of all their deceptions. Every creature lies, and if all creatures lie, then why should even one pretend to do otherwise? Is doing so not also a lie? It felt wrong to even give a second thought to such an idea, but it did make a kind of sense to her. She knew kids in school that lied, and she'd even caught her parents lying to her on several occasions. She knew damn well they were not rustling that one night she walked in on them. She learned about the birds and the bees in the 4th grade, so they didn't have to lie to her, especially not about something perfectly normal and natural for mommies and daddies to do. Although she did not recall learning about anything with handcuffs in class. She also was not fooled for a moment when they brought home a cake with "Happy Birthday, Julie" written in yellow frosting. They were not given the wrong cake at the bakery. That lie made even less sense than the other one. It bothered her they thought such a frivolous lie would fool her. They'd forgotten to order a cake in advance and had to settle for a reject. She would have understood if they had just told her that. It was kind of funny, after all. Who can't spell Julie? It had not dawned on her until she heard her mother's car pulling out of the driveway that she'd have to play out the lie for several days every month until nature took its course. The physical evidence ended up not being necessary. Nobody wants to see that, but she still giggled and said, "I'm gonna need more food coloring." All that day, Tiffany laid in bed, reading with a pinpoint focus she never experienced before. She loved learning new things, but this was different. Never before had she read such a thick book, especially one with so many unfamiliar words and foreign concepts. She struggled at first, but eventually no longer needed to reread passages. Before long, she was speed reading at a rate that would have baffled people that teach seminars on this subject. That night at dinner, Tiffany absent-mindedly picked at her plate of liver and onions. She could not stop thinking about the book and the many interesting things she gleaned from its pages. She was more than a little surprised it had taken her less than a day to read most of it. As she sat there wondering what the last chapter had in store for her, a passage from the book came to mind. "It shall pass through any portal of your choosing, but choose wisely, for your decision will reflect greatly upon many things seen and unseen." The thought of drawing the mischief into the world of man seemed like some good old-fashioned scary fun, but she had no intention of performing the ritual. It was just fiction. She wasn't going to be one of those kids that got too carried away with fantasy role-play. Besides, she doubted she had the nerve to sneak out at night by herself. However, she did flirt with the idea for a moment while moving a rather big chunk of liver around on her plate. Acquiring some of the ingredients would be a bit of a challenge, and yes, the instructions were a little strange, if not outright macabre. Even so, the prospect of bringing a little bit of magic back into the world did make her wish seem that it could be possible. The book told a fantastical history of the world, one where man waged war upon the beasts of the land, twisted the pure essence of the four elements, and systematically banished all magic from the world. Even though the book's depictions of the old world seemed quite frightening and chaotic, she couldn't help but think that maybe that was better than the facade man had created. Tiffany thought of the frog spawn her biology teacher had brought to class. She figured it would be the perfect medium, mainly because she loved frogs, but also because she would not want the mischief to be too big and uncontrollable. She did not know why her first thought had been an ostrich egg, even if she could somehow get her hands on one. She balked at the idea of trying to hide a giant bird from her parents. Besides, ostriches were awkward and ugly, while frogs were cute and interesting little creatures. "You're awfully quiet tonight. You feeling all right?" "Sure, Mom, I'm fine. It's just been a strange day." Her father swallowed a piece of liver awkwardly at the hint of what went on that morning. He cleared his throat and tried to sound encouraging. Yeah, I bet it has been." Seeming to have lost his appetite, he set his fork down and dabbed at his mouth with his napkin. Tiffany and her mother gave each other a knowing glance as they laughed playfully at his discomfort. After dinner, Tiffany rushed to her room to finish the book. Despite not having slept the night before, she was giddy with excitement and brimming with an energy that felt almost electric. The book she pulled out from under her bed was worn and faded, its pages yellowed. She swore it looked almost brand new when she found it. The thoughts of a boy from the neighborhood popped into her head. She touched her lips, wondering what her first kiss would be like. Jason was a bit older than her. a freshman in high school, but their difference in age did not weaken her resolve to one day grab him by his shirt collar and pull him in for a hot, steamy kiss. She did not recall opening it, but thought nothing of it, since daydreaming about Jason always made her space out a little. Sadly, it did not take long before her enthusiasm died of the vine. She came to a page with the words, "The Final Lesson," written in bold print. She flipped back and forth through the blank pages that came after, but found nothing. Eventually she stowed the book under her bed and lay down. Despite feeling shortchanged and irritated like her mother had felt when she received a $10 check from Publishers Clearinghouse, Tiffany fell asleep almost instantly. She woke up the next morning with a resolve to finish what she had started, and just like that, Tiffany had begun to believe the impossible could be possible. She decided to test her mettle and perform the ritual. Reading the book had been the first step. Scattered throughout its pages was everything she needed to perform the ritual. The second was acceptance. Tiffany needed to believe something was missing from the world, and she could draw it back into being. The third step was gathering all the necessary provisions to complete that task, and the fourth was finding and preparing the conjuring site. Tiffany knelt down and dug a hole big enough to fit her splayed hands side by side. She then poured in a bit of water and shaped the hole until it was smooth and concave like a basin. Next, she carved a pentacle into the center and applied a thick layer of honey to the basin's surface. She carved in the soil the first loop of the symbol for infinity around the basin, and the final loop where she would kneel during the rite. To the left of the basin, outside the infinity circle, she placed her father's machete, and to the right, a short stick with one scorched end. She then filled the basin with pig's blood. It flopped into the basin in one big congealed clump, jiggling like a jello mold. Using butane torch, she heated it until it bubbled and rippled like water. While the blood cooled, she ran off through the forest to the creek nearby to wash her hands and mentally prepare herself for what would come next. About halfway there, she realized she'd forgotten her flashlight. She did not need it, though, for wherever she tread, beams of moonlight found their way through the trees, lighting her way. If someone had told Tiffany a few weeks ago she would soon be prancing through the woods in the middle of the night without a stitch of clothing on, she would have laughed and said they were crazy. When she reached the creek, she came upon a young doe dipping its tongue into the cold water. She immediately stopped in her tracks, worried the deer would bolt, but instead it lifted its head and looked right at her. It stepped into the shallow creek, disturbing the reflection of the waning moon and the water's surface, and confidently strode up to the young girl. The doe stood before Tiffany for a few seconds, and then calmly turned and walked further along the creek. She gazed after it until around the bend and slipped out of sight. Tiffany raised her hands to the sky and looked up at the stars above. There was magic at play. She could taste it on her lips and feel it running along her goose-pimpled flesh. As she stared up into the universe, the stars seemed to flicker with the message only she was meant to read. She understood that deer's acceptance of her was a sign. The creatures of the forest knew what she was up to, and they approved. She needed only to return to the ritual site to don her cloak of blood and break the spell that has held man above all others for far too long. She knelt down into the water, unfazed by its chilling touch, and washed her dirty hands. Then she turned back the way she had come and dashed off towards her destiny.